Hey, I'm Josh Ryan. We said last week was the final show. That was partially true.
I'm Brendan Escott, and this is my first time here.
Yeah, great timing for you, considering we're about to lose the show forever in the coming weeks. But you get to make one appearance.
I had to get one under my belt, right?
Absolutely.
We've had intern Brett, now it's my turn.
That's true. Intern Brett did have his moment to shine, which went surprisingly well. Welcome back to The Gloves Are Off, everybody. Lance Phillips, Chris King are gone forever, but we have a couple of shows left on the docket before programming changes coming up this fall. And again, Brendan Escott, our lovely intern, who's done an excellent job for us this summer. Thank you. You're taking off right away for a new job.
That's correct. I'll be joining the Sherwood Park Crusaders. I'm sorry, Bobcats fans. I'll be joining the crew as their lead play-by-play guy, as well as some digital content creation as well. So super looking forward to that.
So he's taking off soon, but we had you for basically another week. So happy to have you on board here. I'll try to give you the same kind of content you've come to enjoy for the last several months, almost 2 years now, with Lance and Chris mainly behind the table. Might not be quite as hot takey as before, but we'll do our best to make progress on that. So shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Let's get started then, and we will start with something Lance certainly would have been excited to talk about, the CFL and a big trade in the CFL with Johnny Football. Yes, Johnny Manziel, no longer in Hamilton, a multiplayer trade sending him to the Montreal Alouettes, where it's expected that he's going to get onto the field. Now, Brendan, you're a big CFL fan as well. What do you think of this move? Is it going to benefit both teams?
They gave up the farm to get him, and I think it really will. So basically, Johnny Manziel was the pull. He was the reason to watch the CFL this year, and then all of a sudden, Jeremiah Masoli at the helm of the Tiger Cats plays the football of his life. And suddenly we've got an impasse. Meanwhile, the Alouettes are struggling mightily to score any points. They've had 69 points through 5 games. They're averaging 13 a game. That's inadequate in the CFL. So I love it. I think he comes out right away and starts to tear up the league like we all expected.
Absolutely. So again, he went along with offensive tackle Tony Washington and lineman Landon Rice. I also think this will work out. I think people are forgetting just how good Johnny Manziel was when he was in college. I mean, he won the Heisman Trophy, for Pete's sake. Like, he was that dynamic. 69% completion rate. It's a very funny number, of course, for him to complete at. But very efficient quarterback. And the CFL, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's a more wide open game in a lot of ways than the NFL. As a quarterback who loves to go on the run, that probably benefits his game. No?
That's exactly right. And I think for somebody that's kind of an undersized quarterback as well, this is just really, it's best suited. I think that even if he wants to make that jump to the NFL in the next year or two, this is the place where he's going to get the reps in, and finally he's going to get a chance to actually get out on the field and showcase what he can do since he's been rehabbing his life, so to speak.
Absolutely. And again, we always want to see a good comeback story. We had that with Tiger Woods, which we might get to in a second. Maybe people will get to see that here with Johnny Manziel, or it'll continue to go spiral downward. Again, it's been an up and down professional career for him. I think the CFL certainly is hoping that this move pans out because they'd like to see the Alouettes elevate as well.
So, Josh, Lloydminster Extreme Junior B lacrosse team, they finally slayed the dragon. They are going to provincials. They took down their rival Lakeland Heat. How significant is this?
Well, it's significant, as you just said. It's their first time advancing to the provincial championship. This 5 years with Coach Graham Murray. They were never able to get past the second round. They've gotten close against the Lakeland Heat, the rivals from Cold Lake, who have basically dominated the North Conference portion of Junior B Tier 2 lacrosse. Great performance in goal by Kyle Boye. Really stood on his head. Again, a guy who's been with Graham that whole time. And their offense stepped up. I mean, scoring 11 goals both games, and that's pretty good accomplishment against a Cold Lake team that had largely dominated their competition. They're actually the only team to beat Cold Lake this year, as Cold Lake went undefeated during the season except for a tie and then a loss, and that loss was against the extreme. So certainly significant for them on that front, that it's their first time to advance to the provincial championship in a 5-year run.
And you mentioned too that it's a veteran squad this year. So how do you think that bodes for them going to provincials in High River?
Well, I think it bodes really well for them. One, because you want to have since it's their first trip to provincials, you want to have guys who have been around a little bit, who have some veteran experience and some poise. The other thing too about performing well this year is that they lose a lot of these guys, including Kyle and Net. So losing some of those key pieces going into next year means they're going to have to start over a little bit again. And they want to make the most out of this weekend, because you only have one crack at provincials until you start with a new group again. So I think they are positioned pretty well. They have a couple of guys getting healthier now, other guys off suspension. So I think they should have a good showing. But they've been an up and down squad for sure as well.
Excited to see how they make out for sure.
Absolutely. And again, we'll move on now to another big story that happened a few days ago. In fact, most of the contents of it happened last week, and that's in the world of basketball. So DeMar DeRozan, crowd favorite in Toronto, is on his way to the San Antonio Spurs. Incoming is Kawhi Leonard, who we've all of us who follow basketball have followed that saga over the course of the summer. Brendan, I know you're at least a Raptors fan, if not a huge basketball fan.
Yep.
So how do you feel about this? Is this great business by the Raptors, or they treat DeRozan wrong, franchise player and all?
Both. Honestly, both. I mean, loyalty is a very fickle thing in the NBA, and I think the most heartbreaking part of this is that DeMar showed loyalty to the Raptors. He was kind of their first true superstar outside of Vince Carter, and DeMar was the one that really wanted to be there, unlike Vince. So he meant a lot to the city. The city meant a lot to him as well. But you only get so many chances in a lifetime, Josh, to trade for a player like Kawhi Leonard. Whether he wants to be in Toronto or not, he's got a lot to prove after 9 games. Only 9 games last season, and he's in a contract year as well. So if he wants to be in LA, he's got to prove that he can stick around.
For sure. And I think the people are forgetting another thing about this, which is despite it being a risk long term, because it is a risk, no question.
Absolutely.
The thing you have to remember is that this team has a drop-off point, or kind of a parachute to fall back on if things go wrong. So if Leonard barely plays, the team doesn't do well, he's off to LA, all of their contracts line up so they can then start over with a new young core. The fact that they kept OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, and didn't have to trade them is kind of amazing. I think Masai Ujiri really is a genius at the end of the day. He's got such a good track record as GM. It does suck that we have to let their best player go, or for over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And if it's true that Ujiri told him point blank that he wouldn't be traded, that bad faith is a tough thing to swallow. But again, as you said before, it's a bit of both. And as a Raptors fan, you got to be cautiously optimistic that they could be really good this year.
They could. And I think one more important thing to quickly note here is that DeMar was a really good player that led them out of lottery contention in the draft and never to a championship. So that's important to touch on as well, that he was never quite the guy to get them over the hump, if you know what I mean. Now, Josh, a couple of local ball teams did get over the hump. We have 3 provincial champions from Lloydminster.
Yeah, that's really quite great stuff from our local ball team. So Mosquito AA Tier 1 and 5, as I'm reading here. Bantam AA Tier 5 also winning all over the weekend. You also had the Prairie Pirates in action. They didn't have as good a result, just missing out on going to AAA provincials. They'll be in AA provincials, in midget AA provincials in Unity over the weekend. But again, this is a growing sport in the border city. It's been a popular sport for a long time, but it's really started to grow over the past 10 years or so. A lot of really good young ball players at each level, and it's good to see success not only at the Tier 1 level, but the Tier 5. So I know it's got kids who may not go on to play at a higher level and may not necessarily go on to have careers beyond baseball. Many of these kids won't anyway. That's the just statistics and numbers of how many kids actually play minor ball. But seeing the Tier 5 teams do well is great to see. And a couple of other real cool moments. Liam Perro from the AA Mosquito team, not only winning Tier 1, he also won a Braden Holtby jersey over at the provincials from a draw. So, I mean, awesome. What a win for that kid.
And somebody that's going to be in town for him to actually meet and perhaps even get that signed when he brings the Stanley Cup here next week, right?
That's true, yeah. Braden Holtby will be in town with the Stanley Cup. That's going to be a very exciting day for the border city. Again, the baseball season now starting to wind down. It's always nice to see teams, at the very least, you want to see them have a good showing at provincials.
Yeah.
But winning 3 provincial titles shows that the folks who were in charge of Lloyd Minor Ball are starting to do something right, at least on the competitive side of the ball. They're getting pretty good results from the kids that they have. And I've met a few of the folks in that system who really do a real good job with those kids. So again, exciting to see if you're a local ball fan and a fan of local sports in general. If you're a fan of golf, you were pretty happy last week. Plenty of storylines. The big one, obviously, that has been reported everywhere, Tiger Woods making a bit of a comeback and having a good showing. He was in the hunt on that last day. But then the story that ended up overshadowing him at least a little bit was Francesco Molinari, a veteran Italian player who ended up winning his first major. A really amazing story, Brendan. Is that your takeaway from it, or does everything get overshadowed by Tiger's presence?
It does get overshadowed by Tiger's presence, and that kind of bothers me at this point because, I mean, I'm only 23 years old, so I didn't get to see Tiger at his peak necessarily. But every time that guy's on the course, the story's about him regardless of how he's playing. And it was good that he had a better showing this time around, but I think it's frustrating, and it's got to be frustrating as a professional golfer as well, to have that constantly be at the forefront no matter how he's playing, how he's doing. All the talk's about Tiger.
Yeah, I agree with you on that front. You had a number of other great storylines. I mean, Jordan Spieth, until a bad final round, was in the running for that championship as well. Rory McIlroy had a great final showing, managed to put himself in a position to maybe win, but Molinari ultimately was just a little bit better than him at the end. That's always been golf, though. That's ultimately been the PGA. Whenever Tiger is doing well, that does attract a bigger audience. Many people may not like that they don't spread the wealth, so to speak, in terms of how it's covered. But every time he is in the hunt, major TV ratings, and he, at his peak, as you said, you maybe didn't get to see all of it.
Yeah.
I managed to see a brief bit of him at his peak, and there's maybe never been an athlete quite like Tiger. He's right up there with the greats of Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Muhammad Ali. He is one of the most electrifying public figures. And for him to go from that to fallen son to, underdog story is kind of amazing. So I think that carried part of the coverage.
Completely agree now, Josh. In addition, here's another Nike athlete, Roger Federer, with the Rogers Cup kind of on the horizon here. It's been announced that he won't be participating at the Canadian Open of tennis. And I'm curious, Josh, what you think about this ever becoming kind of a next mini major in tennis.
Well, and that's one of the things that Canadian tennis fans have hoped for, because you have had the prestige of the tournament grow in recent years, mostly thanks to Milos Raonic and Eugenie Bouchard having a rise around the same time, and some of those tournaments ultimately became a little bit more high profile as a result. At the end of the day, I don't think this will happen anytime soon, and that isn't something that should dismay tennis fans. It sucks Roger Federer is not coming, but it's not just a tennis star going, you know what, this tournament in particular isn't important, I'm just going to go to another one. Federer in particular barely plays over the major circuit. He skipped the clay court season again this year, only focusing on hard court and grass. And because the hard court season is so punishing, it makes sense that he's going to sacrifice certain tournaments. So him sacrificing this one sucks, but this tournament, again, has not been quite one of the biggest ATP 1000s. It has gotten bigger, and it will continue to get bigger. It's just not going to be as relevant as Canadian tennis fans quite want it to.
But as Canadian content in the tennis scene continues to grow, I mean, the viewership, I think, for something like that is only going to increase the prize money that they can dole out, and eventually maybe that pushes it over the hump. And honestly, you look at the content, the guys that have won this outside of the kind of the unheard of German last year, you've got Djokovic, Murray, Tsonga, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray. You've got a pretty long laundry list of tennis's top players winning this tournament. So they are participating, even though I guess for the casual fan, it may feel like the tournament isn't as significant.
For sure. And as you said, plenty of Djokovic at that tournament as well. And Zverev, the German-born player who won last year, is on the rise now. He's a top 4 player in the world. So you're going to see plenty of him again later this year. And so with that, how do we do for our first segment? Okay.
I think we did all right. It's almost like we've done this
see
before.
how we do in segment number 2. We're going to talk ESPYs next on The Gloves Are Off.
We're back. You can keep your gloves on, but ours are off.
And welcome back to The Gloves Are Off. Josh Ryan here with Brendan Escott. One thing we forgot to do in the first segment, we can follow you on Twitter at
Brendan Escott 5. That's BrendenEscott 5.
And of course, you can find me at Josh Ryan Sports. Now, Brendan, did you watch all of the ESPYs this year?
It was on in the background, as it is typically every year, because, see, they're smart. They follow it up the day after the MLB All-Star Game, meaning there's no professional sports.
Yes.
You don't have a choice but to watch the ESPYs. So it was on. I didn't really pay attention, but it was on.
And so that leads then to our conversation as we kind of examine things, as people often do with award shows after the shows actually happen, rather than actually experience the show live. The thing that stood out to me the most, and we'll get to your thoughts in a second, but the thing that stood out to me most about the ESPYs is just quite frankly how irrelevant many of these award shows are coming. People don't really care. There's so much of the content that they try to make funny isn't that funny, and so much that they want to make meaningful doesn't ultimately become meaningful. It's a lot of people on stage taking themselves a little too seriously, first of all, and people don't care about millionaires taking themselves seriously, I think is the takeaway. You can certainly take from the Oscars, and I would say you can kind of take away from the ESPYs as well. And the ESPYs has never been considered in the pantheon of something like the Oscars or even a lesser known show like the Globes.
Yeah, to me, it's 50% about the fashion show that goes on with them all wandering in there with their decked out shoes and their coats with the special prints on the inside. And it's 50% about the host, who this year was Danica Patrick. I couldn't even tell you how she did as the host, but you know, you've got Drake from a few years ago, I believe it was 2014, and he's coming out with songs specially created and stuff. And I mean, it's supposed to be fun, and it's all about the publicity and everything like that. But the point that I'm going to make, Josh, is nobody ever wins the championship and says, yes, this is going to be up for the ESPY Sports Team of the Year. That doesn't happen because stuff like this it's kind of insignificant.
It's completely insignificant. And I'm glad you said Danica Patrick, rather, because that is my next point. That made me miss Drake as a host. I know we're not supposed to say that sometimes with new people trying out stuff. I don't have a problem with Danica Patrick as a human being. Haven't been a NASCAR fan, so haven't followed her career. Yeah. She sounds like she apparently is an engaging person. You've seen her in interviews, but she's not a professional comedian. And it was really obvious watching her on stage try to read some of those jokes off the prompter. It's just not the same thing as having someone who's a professional entertainer. I think it's something she's looking to go into as post her career, but she's clearly not ready for it. And in my opinion, she just wasn't that entertaining. Even though some of the jokes themselves were funny, her delivery, in my opinion anyway, left a lot to be desired.
So who's writing them is I guess what I'd like to know. Like who's actually sitting down and planning out the list of all the ESPYs jokes that are supposed to hit this year and make all the athletes laugh and get up out of their seat, and do they ever really?
I mean, the host often has a role in writing them in when you usually see hosts do for a show like this. Certainly, for example, Jimmy Kimmel, when he did the Oscars, it's Jimmy Kimmel writing those jokes. It's also his writing team that he works with on the Jimmy Kimmel Live show. Joel McHale had a small team with him when he did the ESPYs a few years ago, and I actually enjoyed Joel McHale. So a lot of it was still wooden, but he actually had some good digs in it. Some of it's going to be mean-spirited. That's the point of the show. We don't care to see someone do something, plain and boring. We care when Ricky Gervais does the Golden Globes and just skewers everybody, even though that maybe pushed some boundaries. The only thing that was, I'd say, significant about the show, that had any significance, and that's always the highlight of the show, ultimately for me, is the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. This year they gave it to the survivors of the USA Gymnastics sex abuse scandal. And obviously that follows the Me Too movement, and it's in itself, without the Me Too movement, that story was a massive story in the sports world and beyond. The awareness that does for victims of sexual abuse, and the potential dangers of systems that had allowed people to prey on children, I think that in itself was significant, having all of the women on stage. Outside of that, I don't think anything else really stood out to the average person.
No, and that's where I was going to go with this as well, is you get a lot of the content on there that's featured where you get the stories beyond the sports. You're there to honor athletes and rookies and teams and what have you, but I think the most substantial content that comes out of it, as you just touched on, Josh, is the stuff where we're honoring people for their hardships or legends who have passed away, that kind of thing. I think that's just about the only appropriate avenue for a show like the ESPYs. And I know that now a lot of celebrities are using that as their catalyst for their social message. And that does get met with some controversy, I suppose. But when you've got the platform there, like I said, for one day where there's no other major professional sports going on, it's a good time to use it. So I do like that aspect of it all.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing that I feel mixed about, because it makes me happy, it also I think really puts forth again the notion that the ESPYs just don't really matter that much. Alex Ovechkin won Male Athlete of the Year. Now, this is a significant moment in terms of the ESPYs because there's never been a male hockey player that's won Athlete of the Year. Sidney Crosby has never won Male Athlete of the Year. He's usually the typical nominee. Never been a male athlete, ever. And Alexander Ovechkin wins. Now, it's a cool moment. Certainly Ovechkin, he's riding a wave of popularity with this season. Tell me if you disagree, but is it not fair to say that they gave him Male Athlete of the Year because he went on a drunken stupor post winning the Stanley Cup?
And does that not feed into the fact that this is more of a popularity contest than anything else? He had a good season, but I think that award is more to say congratulations, you finally got the Stanley Cup monkey off your back than it is that he was actually the best North American pro athlete in the year. I mean, you look at what NFL players do all the time. I guess you can't give it to Tom Brady every year, but you know what I mean? Like, was that warranted? Or like you said, was that an acknowledgement of the fact that A, he won the Stanley Cup, and then B, he celebrated like nothing we've ever seen before?
Well, and the other nominees, when you look at it, Jose Altuve from the Houston Astros, that tells me that, you know what, baseball's kind of irrelevant in the U.S. in the bigger scheme of things. It's certainly fallen behind football and basketball in the U.S.
Yeah, we can say that.
Then you have James Harden, another nominee, the only basketball player, and that is maybe a weird year for the NBA where you probably should have made LeBron James the nominee, but then LeBron James has won it so many times too that it was kind of an off year for the NBA that usually takes the award. Finally, Tom Brady, as you said, you can't necessarily nominate or give him the award every year, and he didn't win the Super Bowl. And Nick Foles, who did get recognized for winning best winning performance. Yeah. But again, the thing that stands out to me is that Ovechkin went on a drunken stupor, and everyone loved seeing that, and that's what won the award. Again, so to summation, everyone, we both agree the ESPYs are kind of relevant.
Tongue in cheek, yeah.
Unfortunately. We'll be back with more on The Gloves Are Off.
If you can't score, you might as well drop the gloves.
Welcome back, fans, to The Gloves Are Off. Josh Ryan here with Brendan Escott, and we're going to play a game I like to call Chances. Mm-hmm. It hasn't officially been done on the show. It's similar to some other material you may have seen with Kinger or Lance in the past, but Chances Are is kind of how we're going. And I think we have a couple intriguing ones, kind of covering the wide range of sports. So I'm going to start with you, Brendan. You told me off cameras here, chances that Kawhi Leonard re-signs with the Raptors. What kind of chances are you giving that?
I want to wait and see on this. And I think that the longer that he plays in Toronto, the more he's going to see that there's something to be said for having that city, that market, and this entire country cheering for you. Plus, there's the added factor that because they have his bird rights, he can re-sign for, I think it's $42 million more with the Raptors than any other team in the NBA. I know he wants to go to Los Angeles. I get it. They may not have a room for him on the Lakers. So I think that the chances, I'm going to give it probably a month into the season, and then I'm going to say 50%. And I don't want to do that, okay? But I have to because he is so off of this right now, and I firmly believe that he will fall in love with that city. So there's a 50% chance.
Firmly believe, hey? That's interesting. I certainly know a lot of Raptors fans would be happy to see that. I think the chances of Kawhi signing with the Raptors are actually slightly above 50%. Okay. I'm going to say like 52%. But it's around the same points that you made. there is a good chance that he could fall in love with this city based on other players' experiences coming to Toronto. I think people, as much as they're unhappy about the DeRozan trade and that he said Masai lied to him, I think people are not properly taking into account just how much people respect Masai Ujiri in the industry and how much people are ultimately fans of Toronto when they get into that situation. It's a business at the end of the day. As much as these athletes, and you understand why they feel human about it, these athletes will ultimately want to be in the best situation possible, and a lot of them are starting to look at Toronto as a viable thing before, where it was essentially a laughingstock and no one wanted to go play there. So I do think there is a decent chance of that happening. So.
Okay, so we'll jump into another one of mine here.
Yeah.
I want to know what you think the chances are, Josh, that we get a World Series rematch between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Houston Astros this year.
I think the chances are less than 10% because that doesn't happen in baseball. Baseball is, much like the NFL, is so up and down and so unpredictable come postseason, come the teams that make the postseason, that you can't really predict that those teams are a lock anyway. I think the Dodgers even, it's not a lock that the Dodgers are going to be back especially. I think the Astros are still a great team, but the Dodgers, there's plenty of other capable opponents there. And I actually really do think that there's a chance that we're going to see the Red Sox with the Yankees come October. So I'm going to say 8%. There's a chance, but I don't think it's much of a chance.
It's a spicy take. Now, my thoughts on this is, so the Dodgers, they're probably coming out of the National League. I think that with the Manny Machado bolstering their roster, that pitching staff as good as ever, this is their year to come out once more. But you're right, the Red Sox, I think they have 71 wins through their first 108 games. It's been an absolute tear for them, and I just don't know if it's sustainable. The Yankees, to me, aren't quite there yet. Their pitching isn't on par. If the Astros get healthy, they've got Verlander pitching at 35 years old, better than we've ever seen him before, and the rest of that rotation has a lot of depth as well. I think that there's probably a 60% chance that we do see a World Series rematch.
I would almost have saved that for bold prediction because I think you're playing with a lot when it comes to baseball. Okay. We're going to go now to the world of basketball again. What are the chances that LeBron James makes his 9th straight NBA final?
0%.
Whoa!
It's not happening. And pardon me for having another bold take here in chances, but have you seen the Warriors lineup? I don't know if you know, but they signed DeMarcus Boogie Cousins to basically a deal worth nothing. And if you invest anything in 2K ratings, Josh, in the video game rating system,
I don't, but go ahead.
He's still a 90 overall. So to me,
90.
He's a 90. So you've already got 4 All-Stars. You just added a 5th. You've got players in the league that are basically mailing it in, saying, how do we compete with this? And LeBron has to get past the Golden State Warriors to get there. He won't do it this year. Perhaps next, if that team disbands a little bit more. But
you also have to not forget, the Houston Rockets, despite losing some key defensive players, could still be very, very good. We'll see how this Carmelo Anthony situation develops. You also have to consider, again, the Spurs might be more competitive than most people think. The Denver Nuggets are going to be surprisingly good. That's not a team to sleep on going into this year. And even to get, let's say they get to the conference finals, they're playing the Warriors. That's going to take a little bit of work to beat those other Western Conference teams. He's not in the East anymore. Yeah. And that's going to make a difference. I think the chances of LeBron going to the finals, though, are still at 25% because he's LeBron. I mean, we've counted him out so many times with these crappy Cavs teams, and yes, they played equally crappy Eastern Conference teams or a good Raptors team that just had no mental toughness against the Cavaliers. It's got to give him some shot. He's LeBron.
At 34 years old, man, I'm not sure about that. But what I am sure of, Josh, is you're a big tennis guy.
I am a big tennis guy.
Okay, and I want to know, what are the chances that Novak Djokovic ultimately passes Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer on his sort of career legend status?
Well, I think that there's a higher chance than people think. I'm going to put it at 58%, so not quite 60%. Health is a big part of it, and it's going to be tough to catch Roger, who's so far ahead of him. And I know some people are probably thinking this is blasphemous. Roger's the greatest of all time, and Nadal would be up there if he had been healthier in his career. Listen, Djokovic is one of the only players in tennis history who's won 4 Grand Slam titles in a row. He didn't win them in one calendar year, but he did win them in a row. He won Australian Open, lost in the French final, went on then to win Wimbledon, US, Australian, French. That's an incredible run of championships, and he would have continued to win, I believe, if his tennis elbow hadn't caught up with him. And now he's finally healthy again. Beat Nadal in man-to-man matchup. I think it's a 58% chance he wins.
And I'm going to go higher, and I'm going to say 70% chance because he's younger. He's younger, and I think he's done more towards the beginning of his career than I think we imagined for either of the other two guys. And if he can get his health on track, that's going to be the big thing, right? Is he going to be healthy enough to continue on the trajectory that he's on right now? But I will say that if he gets it together, he is the more talented tennis player at the end of the day, at the end of this almost golden era that we're talking about with tennis.
I think golden era is accurate. I'm surprised to find someone who agrees with my take on Djokovic, because so few people actually do think he's as good as he is. They're completely wrapped up in Federer and Nadal. So really, really quick, the chances that a Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup this year, you have 10 seconds.
Not good enough. I'm going to say 40%. The Leafs would be the ones to do it if it happens.
That's sad news. And we'll be back with more on The Gloves Are Off.
We're back, and the gloves are still off.
Welcome back, Glovers. Josh here with Brendan, and this is a more familiar, portion of the show called Bold Predictions. I know there's been plenty of bold predictions made, especially Lance had some of the boldest. A couple of them did turn out correct, though. Not all of them did. You have already ventured into hot take category, so let's just start you off right now and go for it.
Okay, so the first bold take that I have is that the Toronto Maple Leafs will represent the Eastern Conference of the NHL in this year's Stanley Cup Finals, largely based on the addition of John Tavares.
Wow. Now, I don't think you're the only person to say this, but are you certain? Because they haven't had the most solid D-core in the NHL over the past few years, even as their talent has risen.
I will say that they've got solid enough defensive forwards that perhaps a trade deadline addition, something to just shore it up a little bit on that back end. Anderson is a really good goaltender, and if he gets hot in the playoffs, forget about it. They've got the best centers in the NHL, and I think this is finally the year, and it better be, because those contracts, they're going to have to start paying the young kids. They're coming up real quick. Now's the time.
That's fair. I do think, I would say that I almost can agree with your take and not say it's totally hot, but I think that without a trade, this team is not going to win the Eastern Conference. I think that they possibly have to deal Kadri and give up one of those three top centers, maybe get back a two-way center and a really solid defensive player to go with it. But
I'll agree with that take, because Morgan Rielly should not be your number one defender at this stage of his career.
He should not.
And neither should Jake Gardiner. So
no, Jake Gardiner as your number two is not a good situation, especially with his propensity for turnovers. One of my bold predictions that I've had basically since they made the trade in Toronto is that the Toronto Raptors, despite all the uncertainty around Kawhi Leonard, they're going to be in the NBA Finals. Now, that doesn't mean Kawhi is going to stay. We have great long-term success with this team, even though I think Masai set us up well. I believe they will be in the NBA Finals, and they will push the Golden State Warriors. It doesn't mean for sure that they win. I can't quite go that far, but I believe they will go 6-7 games deep in the NBA Finals against the Warriors, and NBA analysts in the U.S. will lose their minds over this situation.
That's a little too bold for my liking. I don't think that he's necessarily even with this team after the trade deadline. And even if he is, Kawhi, while very talented, is not the guy to put an entire roster on his back and get them into the finals. They still have to get past very talented Boston and Philadelphia teams.
Two good teams.
And I'm just not convinced that one guy, I mean, Kyle Lowry is a solid contributor, yes, but in the playoffs, you know what I mean? So we'll see.
I think Kyle Lowry, he has been better recently in the playoffs. He was actually pretty good in this last run. DeRozan was the one ultimately that did play poor. Fans seem to forget that people were calling for a DeRozan trade. But the other thing you're also forgetting there, I think, is that Pascal Siakam is going to have a really good season. He was posting triple doubles in the Drew League this summer. Like, he was really surprising people. OG Anunoby in his second year fully healthy. And I'd like to see some of the other young guys that they're going to trot out. Van Fleet, another full year. I'm really excited to see. You have another Raptors thought, though.
No, I have another NBA thought, though.
Okay.
I think my bold take is that Giannis, the Greek freak, Antetokounmpo, is going to win the NBA's MVP award this year. And I called this last year, and I think that another year of seasoning. You got to remember, he is 24 years old this year. And he's just an athletic freak. So this is the year that he gets it done. I think LeBron has a lot of pieces around him all of a sudden where he's not going to be that guy. So I think this is Giannis's year.
Interesting. I think some people have been calling for Giannis to win an MVP soon. I don't think many people would agree that this is his year necessarily because the Bucks are still not that good. And while he'll put up huge numbers, I'm sure, typically the NBA MVP goes to players on a top 2 or 3 team. The Bucks are not going to be a top 2 or 3 team in the East. I mean, Russell Westbrook is a complete aberration and basically was voted in because he posted a season-long triple-double.
Yeah.
That was essentially the reason he got the MVP. Unless Giannis posts bigger stats than Russell Westbrook's triple-double and the Bucks are at least a top 4 seed, I just don't see it. The Bucks are still going to be a 5-6 seed at best. And it's more likely that we're going to see maybe a LeBron if the Lakers are really good, or a Kevin Durant or Steph Curry into the mix.
Could be, but is the most valuable player not the most valuable player to his team? And if that's the case, and I think that Giannis has it in him to post a season-long triple-double if he takes this one last leap in his career to put himself into the elite players, I think he gets it done.
All right. I'd like to go back to you again because you have a good CFL take I'd like to hear. So go for it.
Johnny Manziel, when he takes the field for the Montreal Alouettes, in Game 1, will throw for 350-plus yards, and at the end of the Canadian Football League season, he will have a top 5 performance in terms of passing touchdowns.
Really?
Really.
I mean, I'm thinking Manziel is going to do well with the Alouettes, but really? You got to explain yourself here, man.
The reason that I think this is because we talked earlier in the show about how well-suited his game is for the CFL. I think he goes out there and just blows the freaking roof off of it. He's a top round NFL draft pick, not CFL, NFL. So the talent is there. If his head's on his shoulders, and it seems like it is, they just added a Darius Bowman as well, so albeit an older Darius Bowman, but there's a guy that's led the league in receiving, so now he's got a weapon. I don't see why it's not possible.
I just think those are monstrous numbers to put up in this calendar year. Not to mention he hasn't gotten any playing time through the year, so there's going to be some rust no matter what. I think it'll take at least a game or two for him to kind of find his way, and I don't think the numbers will be good enough in those 2 games to jump into that, because that's some high territory, man.
That would be, but I think if anybody in the league is going to be able to step in here and do it like we haven't seen before, he's in the same conversation as Doug Flutie and Warren Moon, and those are 2 all-timers in pro football. Forget the CFL. So if he's able to transition to the Canadian game like that, and he's had some time on the practice field, he's had some time to acclimate to things, I don't see why he couldn't.
All right, we'll wait to see if that finds out.
Time will tell.
I'm not sure if I'm with you on that one. I got 2 more quick here now. I believe that Denis Shapovalov, who's had a bit of a struggle the past couple of tournaments, didn't have a great showing at Wimbledon. He's had some inconsistency. I believe that post-Rogers Cup, he's going to have another great U.S. Open run, and he will be a semifinalist at the U.S. Open.
I don't even think that's too much of a reach, to be honest with
Oh,
you.
okay.
I mean, I hate to agree because that doesn't make for great television, but the kid has all the talent in the world, and at such a young age. We talked about kind of the Rogers Cup and the future of Canadian tennis. Well, in my opinion, he's the headliner of that, not Raonic. It's Shapovalov. So I can see him taking that step. The U.S. Open is where he had that
run last year, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So he's familiar with that playing style on the fake court there, not the grass, not the clay. So if it's something that he's done before, maybe he just gets back in that environment, relives all that, all the momentum he had there, and he puts on again.
I mean, he definitely does have pressure because he has to make that 4th round appearance just to defend the points he earned from last year. But again, I think if you don't have Federer at the top of his game, which is possible if he's skipping out in some tournaments, we'll see. If Nadal and Djokovic show any sign of injury, that hurts the chances there. There's a lot of great players in the field, but I think that Shapovalov his struggle this year is going to finally work itself out coming into this final tournament. So again, it sucks that you don't disagree with me. We're going to end the show really quickly on this. Let's talk local sports for a second. The Lloydminster Extreme the Lloydminster Extreme here are going to make it to the provincial final this weekend in High River. I know we talked about it briefly at the beginning of the show. They were the 4th seed in their own division, but they managed to defeat the top team who had only lost once all year to them as well. And again, veteran squad. Kyle Boyers had a great season in net. I think they're going to make the most of their trip. I'm not going to say they win, but I'm going to say they at least make the provincial final.
And they're riding the wave of momentum. There's something to be said for getting in there and doing work in the playoffs to even get yourself there. You know what it's like to win. You get a taste of that and you like it. So you head on up to High River and yeah, maybe you make another run. I don't see why it's not possible.
And Snow lacrosse fans will hope to see that. We have one more segment left, and it's Owlbert coming up next on The Gloves Are Off.
We're back, and the gloves are still off.
Welcome back one more time, Gloves fans. Josh, Brendan here with Owlbert to bring you the tweets. That is one thing that has not changed, though Owlbert's sunglasses have a bit of a different look. He's upgraded for the week. Although, not that the last pair was bad, but this is a pretty snappy pair. Actually, I'm jumping my turn. You're up first, so
I get to go first.
You
On my
get to
first
go first.
Owlbert session.
Yeah,
All right,
your first and only Owlbert
Let's
session.
take a look. What does Owlbert have for us? Okay. And this is coming from Adam Rank, who is an NFL analyst on Twitter. And I quote, "Dwight Howard is still in the NBA. He's like a TV sitcom you can't believe is still on the air. So I guess he's the NBA version of The Big Bang Theory."
That's how a lot of people would describe Dwight Howard, though. I mean, listen to Bill Simmons' podcast, and all they can do is talk about how Dwight Howard's a coach killer, and it's amazing that Dwight Howard is going from team to team to team, except for Joe House, apparently. He's a Wizards fan, so he's excited somehow. I think it's fascinating that he went from an MVP candidate, they were talking about, will he be one of the greatest big men of all time? 5 years later, he's irrelevant. It's kind of amazing how the NBA has changed over that time span.
Well, that's the problem, is that the NBA's game entirely changed away from anything that Dwight Howard was good at doing. And now you can't have just a big man who sits in the post and dominates that way. Yeah. So he kind of shot himself in the foot with that whole prima donna Los Angeles situation as well. For sure. But yeah, in terms of his style of play, not anymore. Not
to mention getting Stan Van Gundy fired. That wasn't a great look, though that happens in the NBA all the time. This came last week from at SN Carly Agro, the creator of the Gloves Are Off, and of course Sportsnet anchor. She made an appearance last week with Lance and Kinger, and also chimed in after the show, so she gave it a watch. Way to go, team. Congrats to everyone who contributed to this legacy. Long live local sports. I know that's a little bit sad to say long live local sports when this show is leaving in a couple of weeks, but we're still continuing to do sports reporting in the area, and I do like to hear that shout out from someone who started it all those years ago. We've had plenty of people come through New Cap in the years since, and in the production as well. We've had a lot of great guys work on the production team, especially the guys that have been patient with us today, certainly doing a great job. So good to see that. Props from a legend in the Lloydminster area.
You get a little bit of a Sportsnet shout out there. I like it. Nice to not forget your roots.
And not to forget Moses Waldo was also on the show last week, former Gloves anchor as well.
Okay, so should I sing this or should I?
Yes, I would like you to sing it. Yes, please sing.
And I have zero chops, so.
Oh, don't get yourself.
I believe in Kawhi. I believe that his quad is fine. I think about it every night and day.
Really?
Eastern Conference Finals, we're on our way.
Now, I do believe, but do you really think that every night and day?
No.
It's a little weird if you thought about that all the time.
That's coming in from Andrew Magne. He tweeted at Tim and Sid that tweet. That was excellent.
And it's a great reference to another Tim and Sid classic, which is I Believe in Messiah. Look that up on YouTube.
We do.
Well,
we do believe in Messiah.
And that's the thing. I believe in Messiah. This is another savage skewering of Dwight Howard from at Bob Ryan, or at Globe Bob Ryan. He's a sports writing legend in the Boston area. If I had to play a basketball game for my life tonight and the only center available was Dwight Howard, I'd play with 4. I mean,
come on.
Can you take I don't know if there's a worse thing that can be said about Dwight Howard than that. You'd rather play with 4 guys than 5.
He can still rebound.
You're
for
right.
crying out loud.
At
He's
the end of
7'1".
People forget that with Charlotte, he actually had some decent numbers this year. Like he gets like 15 and 15 a game. He's better than a lot of big men in the league.
Maybe just tape his mouth shut. And
One could make. There's some who, if you take all the off-court stuff, someone could probably make the argument that you'd rather have him than of Jonas Valanciunas, or certainly you'd rather have him, again, off-court stuff aside, you'd rather have him than say a Zaza Pachulia on the Warriors. I mean, that was the next step I was waiting for. If the Warriors had signed Dwight Howard, anyway,
although
next
Zaza doesn't want the kind of money that Dwight thinks he still deserves.
And that's exactly it.
Oh, this breaks my heart. This looks like an Instagram post, actually, Josh.
Yes.
But it's from DeMar DeRozan, directed at the city of Toronto, and I'm going to try and blaze through this real quick. Words could never express what you've meant to me. I was just a 19-year-old kid from Compton when we first met, but you took me in and embraced me as one of your own. I am so grateful for the love and passion that you've given to me over the past 9 years. All I ever wanted to do was duplicate it tenfold to show my appreciation. Thank you, Toronto. Thank you, Canada.
Classy guy, DeMar DeRozan. We're going to miss you. There's a great joke. We'll see if we get to that later in the tweets that goes counter to that. But we'll start with NBA on TNT. Dirk Nowitzki signing a 1-year, $5 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks. 21st season with the Mavs will set an NBA record for consecutive seasons with one team. That's pretty cool. Dirk's been a long-timer.
He has, and I think that helps cement legend status. You look at Kobe,
sure.
You look at guys like that, for sure. Oh no, more Dwight Howard stuff. This is actually a quote from Dwight Howard, though. I learned magic for 8 years. I traveled to La La Land, learned how to work with rockets. Then I went and learned how to fly with some hawks. Got stung by the hornets. That's a joke. And through all of that, it's taught me how to be a wizard. Of course, Josh, in reference to him signing with the Washington Wizards.
Dwight Howard's got some jokes.
Yeah, he better, because he's got no game anymore.
Let's run over this quick. Fantastic day. This is from @Bantam AA Twins. Fantastic day for Twins baseball. 3 provincial titles. Mosquito, again, Tier 1 and 5, and AA Tier 5 as well. Way to represent Lloydminster baseball. That they did. They did a good job.
Absolutely.
We'll rapid fire through the rest of these here.
All right. I thought I'd seen it all when I watched Colin Sexton try to intimidate his opponent by flexing on defense.
I love this video
Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, Colin Sexton believes he is going to take over for LeBron, and I couldn't be happier that he is what Cleveland ends up with. From @The Onion, Mascots Union demands more bald men to playfully tease between innings. That I'd be down for more bald men for them to tease between innings. I love The Onion.
Would you ever be a mascot?
No.
No?
No. Too hot.
All right, ESPN stats and info. Francisco Molinari becomes the first ever Open Major champion. Played final 37 holes without a bogey or worse. He's the first major champion since Steve Elkington at 1995 to play the final 2 rounds without a hole over par. So that just goes to show you the groove that he was in.
Yeah, another quick one from @MissLions, a former intern here at the New Cap team. Now that I got some time to grieve DeRozan, we got Kawhi. That's the downside. Everyone's still really excited. Yeah. Sorry, DeRozan.
Bittersweet. 15.
Ennis
Cantor is the last one we'll look at, Josh. Apparently Snape works at American Airlines.
I love it. Thanks very much for joining, guys. That's the note to end on. Josh, Brendan, and have yourselves a great week.